Hello everyone, and a big welcome back to my subscribers. Hope you're enjoying the content, and if you're not a subscriber, why not? What's wrong with you? Right. Well, today I wanted to find out just how easy and accessible an assembly language build is to be done in a virtual machine or an emulator. Now, the reason I'm asking this question is because I want to do an emulation, write an assembly programmer for a CPU that isn't the CPU I'm using. So my host computer is an Intel, AMD actually, but the CPU that I want to write assembly language for is a RISC processor. So I'm going to have to use an emulator, and I wanted to see how well that worked out. Now, RISC is a new technology. It's open source hardware, and I find this really interesting and intriguing. And I wanted to see how well I could do some assembly language without actually physically having one of these things, because obviously I don't have one. And if anybody's interested in giving me one, let me know. But this is what I wanted to know. How possible is it, or how well does it work to write assembly code for a CPU virtualized or emulated on a different model or type of hardware? So in order to do this, I went to look into how to get a RISC processor going. Now, I use Virtual Machine Manager on my Linux machine. I used to use VirtualBox, but I don't use that anymore. I use the QEMU and Virt Manager on Linux. I couldn't find anything that had that directly, but I did find this page to load Ubuntu as a guest with a RISC-V 64. So I will put the link to this in the video description, but it's relatively straightforward. If you know anything about QEMU, then you're just running the command with the correct machine and then the appropriate switches for networking and whatever. Once you've done all of that, you then rerun it with the CD-ROM effectively dismounted. So what you need to do in this example is we start it with no graphics, and we basically fire it up. You tell it the disk that you're going to put it in, and then you boot it up into installation mode effectively. So what we did here is this page is a bit old. It doesn't give the new Ubuntu. I had to go download the newest image, which is fine. It gives you a link. You can find the newest image for the Ubuntu installation. This is a Ubuntu server, not the desktop, so because you don't have a graphical interface. I then ran this installation with the current server version, which I'd extracted. And then I ran this, and you'll notice here it is, drive here is giving the image file for the CD-ROM image, and then it just boots into the thing, installs it, and then you rerun it without the image going. Now I have this ready to go, and I'll run it. It uses a different boot mode than the normal Virt Manager one, which is why I had to do it on command line. Now, I warn you, this takes a long time. It's really quite slow. So I'll just leave that running for the moment, and I'll go back and show you what I wanted to do. Now, this is GCC, and it's got various switches, and I've been using this to look up the the switches for compiling for a RISC-V processor. Now, I don't know anything really about RISC-V assembly, so I have been watching some tutorials. I will put these links in as well, because it obviously has different register names. It's really interesting. It's got a register that is just 0, which I thought was very unique, which means you can compare anything to the register, which is always 0. Now, I went to riscvprogramming.org, and there is a book on assembly language programming there. When you click the link, you get this HTML page, which is great, but you can't print it, and there isn't a PDF version. So this was a bit of a nightmare for me to try and use. So I actually contacted the author, and he is looking for someone to print and a way to distribute the PDF. But he gave me a PDF copy, but I promised him I wouldn't distribute it. So you can't get it from me. If you need a PDF copy, contact these people, and they'll either help you out or hopefully speed up the process and get that. If you're okay with HTML and reading this way, then it's fine. It's difficult to use as a reference when in an HTML page like this, but it's a really, really, really well-written book, and it goes through some of the stuff you probably don't need if you've done assembly language before about, binary and hexadecimal numbers and converting from, 2's complement and all that. You don't really need any of that. Then you can skip a goodly portion of the first part of this book. But it does get down into the nitty-gritty quite soon, and it starts to show you examples of loading things into memory addresses and how you go about doing this in the assembly language for a RISC processor. Now, having got this far, and a quick reference card which I found on GitHub, which gives me all the mnemonics: add, subtract, XOR, OR, etc. Store, byte, load, all of that good stuff is here. And so I've got a quick and easy reference guide in that. So I'll put that link up as well. And I mean, if we just quickly go back to see if my program is started. Yes. Now you can see that it's quite slow. I mean it's extremely slow. It's not unusable, but it is very slow. Now, I actually have a quite powerful machine. The problem is I was only allowed to put one CPU for this virtual machine, and it only supported, I think, 16 gigs of RAM. So it's not, my other virtual machine, like where I use Windows, I've assigned it sort of 4 processors and 32 gigs of RAM or whatever. But anyway, this is quite slow, and I've made a simple, and when I say simple, I mean a very simple program to test this. I don't know if you can see this very well. Let me just try to zoom in a bit. Right, so you can see that I've got a make file. Now, in my make file, I've got what I believe is the correct processor for this machine. No, that's not it. what I did to find this out was I tried to do you can't really see it. I'm trying to get it up the screen a bit. Right. Actually, it does have two processors. I lied. So this is what I believe is the correct ISA for my makefile. But I've still got problems with it. But before we get into those problems, let's take a break for a second and talk about my sponsor, which I don't have. And my sponsor is myself. And if you want to help the channel, I would really appreciate it if you would go and try and check out my books. They're available on Kindle. This particular one is the first one in a series about Le Retraite, which is the French Foreign Legion retirees. It's an action novel, and I would really appreciate it if you could have a look at it and buy it and give me a review and tell me what you think. Right, so that's it from our sponsor today. So let's get back to the programming bit. Now, when I make this, everything works fine. I have no problems and it compiles properly. But one thing that is a problem is that it doesn't work very well. So if I run the program, which I've just called add it, you will see it will take a little while and then eventually it will core dump. Although it doesn't actually core dump. In Ubuntu server, it sends it off to apport or something, and I don't know, and I can't find the core file, and it doesn't dump to the current directory like it should, and so I don't know what's happening with this Ubuntu thing, but I will eventually fix it. I did find a core file somewhere, but anyway, if you got any suggestions about how I can fix it so that the core dump file is in the directory that I'm working in like it should be, that would be brilliant. I would really love to hear some recommendations about that. But as you can see, let me just dump this out for you again. There is not a lot to this. If I try and get it down past the comments, you'll see that all I'm really doing here is putting two integers into some variables, give it a place to go. I load the first integer into a register, load the second integer into a register, add the two up and store the result in A0 in theory, then load the address of the result, A2 into the result, and then store it in memory in the result, and then I exit. Now, in theory, this should be straightforward. The problem is, of course, I don't know enough about RISC assembly programming, and so I'm going to have to go and try and work out what's going wrong here. Part of the other problem, if I just go scroll back out again, which will be difficult for you to see, but I can do GDB with the program and run it. Let me put a break in, I think it's underscore start. Yeah, okay. So if I do run, if I do I space R, or I'll type it all out, it should be info registers. You can see this is very interesting because it isn't what I expected. And it's not like the ARM information, but you do have a significant amount of information about the registers. and what's in them. So I'm still working through this, and to be fair, this is the first time I think the register thing actually worked for me very well. Typically it didn't work very well, but I can now do some debugging. I can see what the registers say. I can try and step into the program, and it doesn't step very well, and eventually it'll crash. But this is the point that I'm at the moment. So let me ask you, my subscribers and audience, have you ever done any assembly on a RISC processor? And if so, where do you think I'm going wrong here? Why do you think it's core dumping, illegal instruction? Because I can't work out whether it's because I'm sending the wrong flags to the make with the makefile. I can't really work out what the processor ISA should be. I think I got it right, but I'm not 100% sure. Have you done assembly on an emulator before? I mean, how well did it work for you? Do you have problems with the simulator, or realistically, should I be looking to get an actual physical CPU? So if anybody has any suggestions to help me, I would really, really appreciate it, and I think it would be great. But I did want to do a video that showed that you could load up a different CPU and run it. Now, I also use a 6502 on an emulator, which I've loaded into a Docker instance on my computer. Maybe I'll show that at some point later. And I don't really have any issues around that, but that's actually JavaScript as an emulator. It's not a virtual machine like this. Okay, so today we talked about installing a RISC processor and Ubuntu server and trying to do some assembly language programming on this machine when it's done. I will leave all the links to all the stuff I've used in the video description. If you like this sort of content, please like and subscribe and share this around with your friends, because it really helps out my channel and I really do appreciate it. And as I say, I'm not sponsored, so have a look at my books. It helps me. You might like the books, in which case it's a win-win for both of us. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much. I'll see you again soon.